in between. But I'm Julian Skyrme. I'm the Executive Director of Social Responsibility and Civic Engagement, and I'm going to be chairing today's session and just doing a bit of introduction. But let me just quickly ask some colleagues to wave to you who are here now, and they'll introduce themselves later. So there's Deanne Johnson, who you're going to hear from today. Hi, Deanne. Thank you. There's Stephanie Snow, Professor Stephanie Snow. Hi, Stephanie. Nice to see you. We've got Professor Sheena Cruikshank, who's going to be presenting today alongside us, and Professor you can give us a wave now, Sheena. Thanks for putting the camera on. Hi, Sheena, nice to see you. And Professor Lynn Bianchi is also presenting, and she's going to be joining us. She's doing something else. She's coming in just for her particular session. But thanks very much for giving up your time today. We're going to spend about 50 minutes going through public engagement today as part of some broader sessions we're delivering on social responsibility and civic engagement this year. So Deanne, if you didn't mind putting some slides up, we've got 3 case studies we're going to be sharing. But before we do that, we just wanted to provide a little bit of context, and then you'll hear 3 really good examples of public engagement. So if we can go to the first slide, please, Deanne. Just in terms of today, I'm going to do a quick welcome, and then we're going to, I'll pass over to Deanne, who will show you a short film on public engagement, and then we will be giving you 3 examples, and we've tried to frame this in terms of an example of a local initiative, raising big global issues, of course, but delivered locally, a national initiative, and an international initiative. And then we'll be opening up for questions from colleagues and giving you lots of links to follow things up if you're interested. So next slide, please, Deanne. Oh, I should say as well, would it be okay if we can record this session as well? And if that's okay, Deanne will click record. Thanks, Deanne. Okay, so this session on social responsibility and public and civic engagement is set within the context of the university's overall strategy, where we have 3 core goals within the university in the lilac colours there: research and discovery, teaching and learning, the 2 traditional functions of a university. Of course, we have a unique commitment within Manchester to social responsibility, and it's that's the area that many people presenting today work within and across. So next slide, please, Deanne. In terms of our priorities within the university, we have a strategy for social responsibility and civic engagement, and there are 5 big goals that we're trying to pursue through that strategy. One is around social inclusion, another one is around prosperous communities, another to create better health, another of environmental sustainability, and 5thly, cultural engagement. And they're the 5 parts of our plan. Next slide, please. And underpinning that, we deliver those 5 priorities as a university through our research, of course, through our commitment to teaching and learning, but also by engaging and listening and partnering and involving the public in our work, that 3rd dimension. And 4thly, how we operate as well. We spend a lot of money, we have a big estate, we employ a lot of people. So we're delivering our commitment to social responsibility and civic engagement in many ways. We're going to be focusing on that 3rd area today of public engagement. But just be clear as well, there are colleagues who perhaps never come into contact very much with the public at all, who do amazing research, which really has a massive contribution to society. Same with teaching. And also we've got colleagues delivering amazing work in professional services, managing our estate today. We're one of the biggest emitters of carbon in Greater Manchester, and they're doing things to reduce that. They may not need to talk to or engage with the public in that work, but it definitely is part of social responsibility and civic engagement. So there's those 4 dimensions as well. Thanks, Deanne. Next slide. In terms of where we do our work, I'm not actually sat on campus. I'm actually on the Oxford Road corridor. There's a little clue, and you can guess where I am later. But I'm just off campus. But most of you, around half our staff live in Manchester, and around 3/4 of our staff live in Greater Manchester. And certainly that's a big focus of our work in the city of Manchester and Greater Manchester. We're part of the Northwest and the Northern region. We have national dimensions, as Stephanie's initiative is a great example you'll hear about today. Global, Lynn will talk about that. But even if you went down to our Jodrell Bank Centre for Discovery, you could also argue that our impacts go into outer space as well. So we work on every single every single spatial dimension really through our work. Next slide, please. Underpinning our work is our commitment to partnerships, working to deliver our strategy through our people, chiefly our staff, students, alumni, and the public, and having really good processes. We could do thousands of things in this area of work, but so we need to be focused. How do we measure what we do? How do we communicate what we do? And how do we celebrate our work as well? So there, just to say that within our strategy for social responsibility and civic engagement, those 3 Ps are really important. Next slide, please, Dan. In terms of performance then, just to say that we have 9 measures of success within the university overall. One of them is social responsibility, and there's 2 elements to this: to be top 2% in the world for our commitment to the SDGs, and to be in the top quintile for the knowledge exchange framework for public and community engagement. So next slide, Deanne. We are hitting that that first target in terms of being top 2% in the world for impact towards the SDGs. In fact, we're the only university in the world now that's been top 10 for all 6 years of the Times Higher impact rankings there. So we're doing really well in terms of that performance against the big goals the UN has set out that are important to the world. And secondly, Deanne, thanks, is our performance in the knowledge exchange. We're in the top quintile for our performance of public and community engagement. So that compares us to similar universities and asks how good is the quality of our work on to engage and involve the public in our work. And we perform right at the very top level for that. So we're doing really well as an institution. So everything you hear about today is set in that context of success. Next slide, Deanne. So I think now what we want to do is give you a quick introduction to social responsibility. I'm going to hand over to Deanne, who works in my team in our central office for social responsibility. Deanne is our public engagement manager, and Deanne oversees a lot of our work with the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, and also helps draft the university's response to the knowledge exchange framework for public and community engagement, and oversees things like our watermark and lots of our training and development of staff around the university. So Deanne, please take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Julian. So this short video is just going to introduce you to what is this thing called public engagement and what is our approach to public engagement at Manchester. It starts with an introduction by our former Vice-Chancellor, but as you know, we've got a new one in play, Duncan Iverson. At the time of recording, Nancy was in play and was overseeing the Platinum Award.
As a passionate advocate for public engagement, I'm proud that we've embedded a culture of high-quality practice through our core goal of social responsibility. We are delighted to be recognised nationally with a very prestigious Platinum watermark for our sustained excellence and leadership in public engagement.
At the University of Manchester, we're recognised globally for our commitment to social responsibility and public engagement. Our unique goal of social responsibility commits us to using our knowledge for social good, creating a fairer, healthier and greener future for all. And as an engaged university, two-way engagement is embedded in our research and teaching and illuminated through our sense of place and culture.
Through engaged research, we actively work with and involve the public. Citizen science, patient involvement, policy engagement, working with schools and participatory research. We value different forms of knowledge and expertise. Sharing and co-producing knowledge in partnership with diverse communities helps to make our research meaningful, relevant and impactful.
Through engaged teaching, we listen to and bring together students and communities to address societal needs. From service learning to volunteering and developing projects in partnership with external organisations, we make a positive difference to our communities and enhance the educational practice and experience of our students.
Through our sense of place and our cultural engagement, we connect our work to people. Our world-leading cultural institutions offer distinctive places of belonging, providing creative, imaginative and co-creative places for ideas, social development and cultural exchange. Our civic engagement informs our work in Greater Manchester, improving lives and benefiting communities across our city region and beyond.
We inspire and are also inspired by the public, and through our commitment to purposeful public engagement, we will make a difference to the world. Okay, thanks, Deanne. So that hopefully that's given you an overview of some of our work, and I'm now going to hand over to we're going to go do it in this order, working outwards: local, national, international. So really nice to see you, Sheena. Pleased to hand over to you to talk about the work we've been doing on air quality in the most neighbouring community of the university. Literally buttresses onto our campus in Ardwick. So over to you, Sheena. Thanks.
Thanks, Julian, and thanks very much for the invitation to talk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project and the work that we've been doing in Ardwick, which is just next to the university, and particularly the work we've been doing around air quality. And we've been taking a participatory approach to this. Can I have the next slide? I was trying to move my slides there. So to set the context, pollution is a major risk for our health. So pollution comes in many shapes and sizes, and big causes of it in cities are vehicle exhaust fumes. Fires are quite relevant at the moment, not so much for Manchester, but for other cities across the world. And also wood burners are a big problem. And we also get a lot of emissions from in industry, as well as agriculture, which again is less of an issue perhaps in Manchester. So there's multiple sources. And these are responsible for a great deal of deaths across the world, but also causing and worsening a number of conditions, including respiratory diseases that affect the lungs, things like asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cardiovascular disease, and even diseases that affect the brain, such as Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. So we took a participatory research approach to looking at this problem in Ardwick. We were invited to come to Ardwick. Ardwick is one of the sort of anchor partnership that we have with the university, and they were very concerned about air quality and health. And this is the sort of UKRI definition of participatory research. So it's very much an equitable partnership where you're learning from each other. And this was very relevant to my research, which is also about looking at how pollution affects immune function and health. Next slide, please. So this project kind of launched around 2019 with some UKRI funding. Obviously, that was a little bit of a challenging time if you're going to start a project, as there was a minor pandemic that happened. So that's been really interesting. But what we were able to do is quite a lot of really creative ways to continue our connections with the community and build a larger and larger network there, and continue to build trust. The goal over the years has never changed. It's about addressing their concerns about air quality and health and involving them in the research process. So we've trained resident co-researchers, we've had numerous consultation workshops, we've had art workshops, we've done activities such as participatory mapping, pollution monitoring, creating ultimately a walking route, and trying to affect policy, as I'll tell you about in a second. Next slide. So an important cornerstone of what we've done is to share the consultations and share the findings at all stages of the project. This is really important to keep people kind of part of what's going on, and to see that they can also get their feedback all the way through. For example, a piece of research had been done in the area before we went there, and the findings have been shared as a scientific paper, but they'd never been turned into lay language that they could use. We did that, and now it is being used by the school as one of their kind of core activities. So we thought about this. This was embedded in our process, and you can use quite creative ways. So one way that we did was using sort of sketching, kind of one of the consultation sessions that we had. So you can't really see that, but that is a sketch of a consultation session. We also tried to share findings outwards by writing things like blogs. This is a blog with policy at Manchester. And we tried to publicise results by bringing in the media as well to get actions taken. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we needed to do was get concrete data that we could really use. Ardwick is bounded by kind of really, really busy roads. We've got the A6, we've got the Mancunian Way, and we've got Brunswick Street, which is quite busy, as well as Upper Brook Street. These are all really busy roads. And what we did is we did a series of participatory mapping workshops where people put in how they get around, where they need to get to in Ardwick. And then they also identified issues that they have. And all these maps were put together and digitized to create a number of maps that give us all sorts of information. But what you can see here, not very well, admittedly, is a map showing some of the problem issues. So, for example, there's really big issues around the Apollo roundabout. And we also then did pollution monitoring at these sites. So this is an example of some data showing the A6, that busy road, which happens to be next to the school, and a green space. And you can see it's significantly higher on the A6. In fact, it's 3 times higher than what we'd expect in a typical urban place. So it is a real issue. Next slide, please. Now, this data has all been shared with the community and they're using it, but we immediately used it to start creating a green route. So we took advantage of the fact that Ardwick Climate Action had been getting funding to do some wonderful planting in the area to create little pockets of green in Ardwick. And we knew these areas now were less polluted. So we created a map, and this is a miniature version of that map, and we hired an artist to create wayfinders, and you can see myself and Gordon from the community in the centre there standing beside one the day that they first started to go up in Ardwick, which is why we look so excited. So these are dotted around through Ardwick to indicate where you are. There's got a QR code which links to a website which tells you a little bit more about the site, some of the plants that go on there, and a little bit about the project. And the final picture you can see is when we finally launched this in April of last year. And you can also see some of the kids from the school, the local school there, and also Amna, who's one of the local councillors who's very, very engaged in this project. Next slide, please. So here's sort of some of the impacts that we've had. So we've been raising awareness of the risks of pollution, not just locally, but further afield. So we've had press articles, we've had television pieces, we've written policy blogs and articles. We've held numerous local events. This is probably an underestimate, if I'm honest. And also there's some information about this in the Manchester Museum Wild exhibition, and we've held at least 20 policy consultation events with local GM politicians and councillors, but also national MPs as well. We're encouraging the use of active travel. This is a big goal for GMCA, and this is something that we've been looking at, and it was folded into the GM Get Walking Festival, so there was numerous walks using it. And it's a hub for targeted action. So the community are using this to try and affect change, and I'm supporting them with that. And for example, one thing we were able to do was get Andy Burnham to come and visit the site, which I think I've got a picture of in the next slide. We can look at the picture, it's fine. And he came into the school and he pledged to try and make sure that our school, well, their school was selected as one of the school streets pilot schools, which will give it some of the infrastructure it needs for the crossing, for example, which is a really, really big need that stops people walking in the area and also encourages more people to drive. And some of the data and some of the findings have also been used to create kind of big events. We've done things like close the part of the A6. This was an event just in the top left corner where you can see the children from the school, and they're doing kind of walkovers the A6 to kind of get people to slow down and to think about the impacts that they're having. I think that's all the slides. Yes, thank you for listening. It's never something you do on your own. Lots and lots of people are involved. These are some of the many people involved and some of the many funders. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sheena. It's a fascinating example of one of the biggest issues globally, air pollution, but what work we can do right on our doorstep. It really touches both those dimensions. And I think this is a great example of a civically engaged university at its best, dealing with issues that matter, really, really matter to local people and listening. I should have said when I introduced Sheena, as well as being a professor in the Lydia Becker Institute, a professor of immunology, Sheena was our academic lead for public engagement for many years. And we're really grateful for the work you've done on our strategy overall, Sheena. And it's a lovely segue by saying thanks to you also to our next speaker, Stephanie Snow, because Stephanie is our second ever academic lead for public engagement. And And Stephanie took over from Sheena in September, I think it was, wasn't it, Stephanie? So I'm still relatively new, but we're really excited because Stephanie, as well, like Sheena, is somebody that's lived and breathed public engagement through their work, through being an excellent researcher and seeing public engagement as a pathway to impact through our research. So Stephanie's going to build on what Sheena's talked about in terms of local impacts, to talk about a national project. What I should say, if there are questions you've got for Sheena from listening to a presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat, and Sheena might be able might want to engage there, but we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. So any questions or observations, please feel free to use the chat as well. So Stephanie, really pleased to introduce you to talk about NHS Voices of COVID-19 and beyond. Over to you, Steph.
Lovely. Thanks, Julian. And lovely to follow on from you, Sheena, in this as well as the academic lead role. So I'm going to share today a project that really came about by chance, and it has its roots in 2017. So if I can have the next slide, please. So in 2017, we were very lucky to get funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to set out and create the first oral history collection of the UK's National Health Service by recording stories from patients, staff and communities in 10 different localities across the UK. So we particularly wanted to take a UK approach, and we worked in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, so that we captured the different perspectives of those different places within the wider sort of history of the National Health Service. And what we wanted to do was to try and capture the unheard voices, especially the older generations who at that period were very much in their 80s and 90s. So we wanted to put on record the place that the NHS has played in everybody's everyday life, the ways in which the story of the NHS is the story of all our lives, whatever shape and form that takes. And the impetus for the project really came from my frustration as a historian, as a researcher, working on the history of post-war healthcare. Since 1948, the NHS has been central to everyone's experiences of health. It encompasses our experiences of illness, birth, death. It's also been the largest employer since the 1960s in the UK, and the workforce has been increasingly diverse across the decades. So thinking about the NHS as a lens for exploring our social history, we could really take any topics such as food, technology, let alone obvious things like science and medicine and technology. But when I looked at the sources and the archives that we've had, so many of the voices of the people who'd created the NHS, who'd worked for it, who'd experienced it, they were missing. Most people speaking on record were politicians, civil servants, clinical leaders, and by and large, they were generally white males. So that was why it was so important to address this issue. So from the outset, we took an approach to building participation as one of the core things in the project. So we recruited volunteers from the 10 different localities we worked in. They trained with us in oral history, and then they went out to homes, hospitals, community centres to record stories from patients and staff and the public. And I think it's really impossible to overestimate the value that these volunteers played, because they were really the people that enabled us to create the diversity and the spread and breadth of the collection that we were able to achieve, because they brought their networks, they brought their own knowledge, their own experiences. If we'd only been an academic team working on our own, we could have done some of the work, but certainly not to the quality that we managed to achieve. So by the time we got to March 2020, everything was going well. We were planning a UK-wide tour, and you all know what happened next. Can I have the next slide, please? So it became very quickly, evident that the NHS was going to be centre stage for the UK's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And certainly it was the biggest crisis the NHS had faced since 1948. And we realised pretty quickly we were in a very unique position. We had our networks, we had our skilled volunteers, we had our partnerships within the NHS and beyond with health charities and community organisations. And I think that the most important thing at that early stage was we were able to have conversations with those networks to actually ask them, did they think it was ethically and morally appropriate to launch a set of interviews at a time of crisis? You know, was it okay to ask nurses to participate when they were working extra shifts and really having very little personal time, plus the anxiety of working through the pandemic? And I think the response that we got that was overwhelmingly positive was the real push that we needed to sort of go ahead. So we had an absolute scramble. We had to retrain volunteers in remote recording. We had to buy new equipment. At one point, Amazon was sold out of the particular wires that we needed. But what it enabled us to do was to start recording COVID testimonies 4 days after the first national lockdown in March 2020. And between then and June, when the first national lockdown began to be eased, we'd recorded over 600 interviews alone. So it was absolutely invaluable to have got in so quickly and so speedily to capture those early experiences. So we were lucky in July 2020, we got further funding, and that enabled us to continue the work and work in partnership with the British Library to create a national collection of COVID-focused testimonies. And all of this work was supported and underpinned by wider ongoing engagement. So, for example, we ran a series of free public online conversations. So we asked people, you know, if we're creating a national collection and we're thinking about subjects like faith or arts and culture or charities, you know, who should we be interviewing? What voices need to be in the collection? And that was a really sort of helpful way of us feeling that we were able to be responsive and dynamic and capture things as they evolved. We also did a lot of partnering with different communities as a way of capturing those perspectives. So, for example, in Manchester, we did a series of online creative art workshops with the Jewish Action for Mental Health group. So that enabled us to collect those vital perspectives. We also produced a film and lots of other ways in which we were trying to share things as we were going along. Can I have the next slide, please? And I think what all of those things enabled us to do was to create a collection that's really distinguished by several unique features. One of the most important things is that history, we know that collective memory can fade rapidly after a health crisis. So recording testimony is really a vital thing to do, not just to help individuals and communities find meaning in their experiences, but actually to preserve the reality of what those experiences were at the time. So as well as being a resource for future generations, it's also a way of helping people live and work through the experience. And one of the great things about the collection, by chance, was that we ended up with a before and after COVID. So, for example, because we'd been recording since 2017, when things came forward about, for example, you know, the NHS workforce crisis had been created by the COVID pandemic, we were able to challenge that because we knew we'd already got the evidence that the workforce shortages had a much longer history than just the pandemic. So one of the things that we did was to look for any opportunity, if there were public and political inquiries, to develop evidence from the testimonies that we got to feed into those inquiries, so that we were really trying to put people's voices from all parts of the UK at the centre of these national considerations of the crisis. So that proved very effective. You'll see a couple mentioned on the slide. The House of Commons inquiry, we were noted in one of the recommendations. So that was a really helpful way because we were able to sort of get things out quite quickly. And then, of course, we've got longer, legacy coming from the resource, which is only starting to sort of really realise impact now. I mean, most recently, for example, I've been contacted by the civil service. They're interested in having a discussion about, how testimony can feed into the importance of developing national strategies that can help during times of crisis and things. So, I mean, I think the impact of the collecting is only just sort of starting now. But none of this would have been possible without our volunteers, without our interviewees, and all the people who supported us. So this is a final bit of feedback from one of the interviewees who gave regular interviews right from the beginning of the pandemic through to December 2023. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. It's a fascinating project which really captures a point in our history as well as the substance of this. So thanks for sharing that. It's a wonderful example of the university undertaking public engagement with, bar none, our most treasured institution in the UK. If you ask to in any sort of survey, people will look at the NHS with so much positivity, and it really captures something really important about this national institution that we all hold so dear. So thanks for that. So we've had local, we've had national, and now I'm really pleased to introduce Professor Lynn Bianchi, who's our Vice Dean for Social Responsibility and EDI within our Faculty of Science and Engineering. And Lynn's going to talk about a project that began locally, but it certainly is an example now of international public engagement. Was delivered through something called CERI, and Lynn's going to explain a bit about this in the next sort of 5 to 6 minutes, Lynn, and then we'll open things up for Q&A about any of the projects that you see. So Lynn, really pleased, and thanks for taking time out of what you were doing to come and join us. Over to you.
Thank you. And I will need to shoot off straight after this. I'm just squeezing it in as best I can, but I really appreciate Deanne and Catherine yourself giving me some time to talk to the group about CERI. And if you ever get the acronym right, you'll be getting some badges from us because it's sometimes well forgotten. But we sit in the Faculty of Science and Engineering, and we have existed for the past 10 years. So we celebrated our decade of difference last year, which you can see the little booklet on there. So even if you don't capture everything today, there's a lovely little booklet there that you can leaf through. So when I came to the university, I came with a background that had originally been in primary science education. I was trained as a primary science teacher and had taught in schools in Greater Manchester for a few years before moving to Sheffield Hallam University, where I forged really the way that we've continued to, I'd say now, sort of reimagine what school engagement, university school engagement looks like. And our absolute laser focus has always been different to outreach, in that we work directly through and with teachers to upskill them. We talk about and inspiring communities of in-service teachers to have the confidence and curiosity to really push forward science education, teaching, learning and assessment in ways that now, of course, link with global sustainability goals, contemporary issues, real-world learning. But it is national curriculum. We're not doing anything outside of the national curriculum. So we've really demonstrated and possibly sort of developed a blueprint for how a university can really interact at local and national level, as Julian says, to improve the quality of teaching. Why? Because we want the quality of experience of learning that goes on with young people to be the best it possibly can be. So we take that approach. We've always had a campaign called Fascinate, and we really want to fascinate teachers around STEM education so that they can go forward with every cohort of young people to fascinate them and really live and breathe contemporary science and engineering in what they do. Now, we do this in a wide range. We've got a really big programme. We are a very small team, and you might say we punch above our weights, but we work right across the sector, and that's how we have the sort of the reach and the power to spread the word, as we say, right across the UK. So we offer a range of teacher professional development courses or experiences where teachers will engage with us and come to the university, or we work with them directly in school through clusters right across the region. We engage with large multi-academy trusts with something called Greater Manchester Learning Partnership, which is every educational representative group, local authority, MAT, whatever, multi-academy trust, for instance, across GM. And we really move and operate at that system level. We are a research group as well. I'd say research with a small r in comparison to my colleagues who've just spoken to you. But it's powerful. I call it close to practice research. So we inform the country at policy level, working with the Education Endowment Fund, the learned bodies, etc. And so there is a research informed practice. But what you'll probably see when you hear and see Civic around the university are opportunities where teachers or young people are working on developing their learning of STEM in lots of different ways, whether it be conferences or projects, etc. But I think that maybe the next slide talks about this thing, this huge campaign now, which is called the Great Science Share for Schools. And I remember talking to Julian right at the inception of the idea for this, and I said, you know, what I really think needs to be created in order to shift the dial on the low status of science within primary schools and sector-wide is a campaign. And I remember talking to him about wanting something like Children in Need. And it was November that we had the idea, and I suppose in current terminology we call that, you know, that was my breakthrough thinking. I really wanted to do something different. If you ask me how I've done it, I'd probably sit here and tell you that I don't know how we did it, but we do really. It's an inclusive campaign. It's very, very simple. It gets young people to ask, investigate and share a question. And we started this locally, and it is now gone international with the support of UNESCO, basically because of its inclusive, non-competitive and collaborative nature. Each year, there are activities and events that take place at the university itself, and you can see a couple of pictures of those, and anybody would be very welcome to initially come and have a look at those and see how we do it. But really, it's not about us as researchers and university academics sharing science. It's very much about empowering young people to do it themselves. And so there's a lot of work that goes behind that. We develop resources for schools and support for schools, and sometimes we'll work with key academic groups to take their research and to work with them to adapt it into a means by which it can be communicated through a national curriculum context, and that all teachers can access it from age, well, for teaching of children from age 5 all the way through to 14. I could talk till the cows come home about it. Please have a look at the website. Everything's free to engage with. If you've got young children, ask their schools if they're going to engage. There are other campaigns like this. One's called Engineering Educates, which really speaks more to how we think as engineers. But there's lots behind Civic. Well, based in MECD, the team of us, a specialist team of ex-teachers and administrators, and we'd be more than happy to speak with colleagues at any point going forward, or share further practice. But I know you're tight on time, so I'm going to shut up and I'll let Julian come back in.
Thanks very much, Lynn. It's a great example. That picture in the bottom left there is a great example of why this project is so special, because what it's doing, it's not just the university directly thinking about public engagement, it's training young people to be public engagement professionals themselves. And that interaction between teaching and learning and public engagement is really brought to life through these projects, because the young people, by trying to explain scientific concepts themselves, are learning much better about these. And a personal example, one of the best things best explanation I've ever heard for global warming was by some primary school children in one of Lynn's events, and they did an experiment which I was privileged to see, where they were heating up two bottles with tops on, and one they breathed into and it had more carbon dioxide inside it, one they hadn't, and they did an experiment and showed that bottle warmed up more quickly. And what a brilliant way to communicate why carbon particles lead to greater global warming. So it's a just wonderful initiative, Lynn, and thanks for sharing that example, which is now a global initiative, really speaking to big issues around the world globally. So Deanne, you're going to say something about University of Manchester, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Super. So we've heard three amazing projects run by our academic colleagues, but actually there's a lot of public engagement that happens through our undergraduates, our postgraduates, our early career researchers, all the way through to our senior academics, and of course through our professional services. And one of those main opportunities, running since 2017, is the Community Festival, which is now known as the Universally Manchester Festival, off the back of our amazing bicentenary last year. Now, more information about this is going to come out, and there will be an open call. You might want to come in a support and a welcome function. You might want to actually co-host alongside your academic peers a tabletop science activity, or you might want to get involved in tours or performances. You can see we have a real range of opportunity available for anyone, whether it's your very first foray into public engagement or you're an old candidate. You're very welcome to take part in the Universally Manchester Festival. So stay tuned for more information about that.
Thank you very much, Deanne. So now we'll take the slides down. We're just going to go and move on to questions and feedback. So really, we got each of our speakers here. I think Lynn's at a dash off again, but we'll try and answer on Lynn's behalf. But if there's anything, comments or observations or questions you've got for Deanne and myself, but moreover for Sheena and Stephanie who've presented their work, please feel free. You don't have to put your hand up. It's a fairly small group. Just unmute yourself and shout out. I'm sure you won't do it simultaneously with somebody else. So please, let's open it up for any observations or comments or questions, please. That awkward silence bit. Can somebody help us out?
So I've always got a backhand question, Julian.
Oh, go on then. Okay.
We didn't really mention the word evaluation, and I'm not talking about our big kind of systematic programs like the Knowledge Exchange Framework or the Research Excellence Framework, but just the value of evaluating. Maybe, Sheena, just give us a couple of your tips around maybe the practice of evaluating public engagement.
Thanks, Deanne, for that question. Evaluation is really important, definitely. I mean, apart from you being able to use it as an impact case, it tells you if what you're doing is working and actually achieving what you want it to achieve. So I wouldn't be without it. I think the type of evaluation needs to be appropriate to the activity and appropriate to the audience. So, for example, I think one activity we did, we had people who didn't speak very much native English. So we used smiley faces and kind of, you know, they could draw how they felt about a particular topic. And that way we could sort of gauge their learning. We've used things like thematic learning, where we've asked young school children to draw what they think they've heard about, and then they create these images and you can see the things that have resonated with them. And actually it can be really, really surprising. So there's lots of really creative ways to fold it in, and absolutely evaluation's part and parcel of good public engagement.
Thanks, Deanne. If anybody's got a question, please feel free to shout out. Otherwise, I've got one for Stephanie. I thought would follow on from your really excellent question to Sheena, Deanne. So is there anybody else who wants to ask anything of our presenters? They'd be really pleased to try and answer. So let me ask you, Stephanie, just you're a professor, a senior academic, somebody starting out, you know, they're literally just finished their PhD, they've got their first role in the university as perhaps a junior researcher, early career researcher. What would you say to them about why if they've not had a chance to get involved in public engagement, why should they consider doing this very early on in their career, and how might they look to do that as well?
Because I think public engagement adds a vitality to academic work that you really don't get from any other source. You know, just from the basic things about asking questions in different ways. You know, if you're an academic and you really know your research topic in great detail, you can be really caught up in lots of the nuances and intricacies. But actually working with the public or talking to communities, you know, getting their perspectives, it can actually just make you think about things in a different way. And then that means that the work that you do within that research process and what you produce, it's going to have that relevance to the public built into it, as well as, you know, furthering scholarship in academic debate and all of those things that are core. But engagement just adds that extra value, I think.
Thanks,
It
Stephanie.
can also help you shape your priorities, and just to add that. So we had I'm part of a team that's put in a very large kind of core centre grant, and as part of that we had patient panels to talk to us and listen to our ideas about the research and feedback on those, and that's been really, really important for informing how we wrote the grant and also how we thought about how we were going to work with the public should we get the grant. So I think it's helpful in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, and perhaps a question to either of you really, Sheen and Stephanie. Just there's also some quite instrumental reasons, and you mentioned about grants there, Sheena, and this idea that public engagement is like a worthy thing to do, or it's like additional, or it's driven by a sense of injustice and wanting to share our knowledge. There's also it just in terms of RAF and TEF doing good quality work. And I was just looking this morning on social media, Sheena, you were being asked by someone who had asthma about something you'd posted, and actually, you know, it was a really good question. I thought I didn't quite understand it, I've got to be honest, but obviously this person was really keen to point out some personal health issue that they had, and the fact that you're interacting with people like that, I guess, makes you a better researcher, doesn't it, Sheena? You know, it kind of sharpens up what you do. Does it lead to new things when you talk to the public like this?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Stephanie will sort of, that's been her experience. I mean, I probably wouldn't even be working on pollution, which I do now, if I hadn't have started working with the public. And that was all because, you know, originally I was doing stuff around infection, but I was working with non-native English speakers, and they were extremely worried about allergies and asthma because that was something they were facing. And there's a massive link to environmental factors like pollution with allergies and asthma. So they kind of got me started on the research journey that I'm on. So thank you to them.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, really. And that's hopefully one of the messages people can take away from today. You know, public engagement, it's not about giving, it's about gaining as well. You know, I think it's really important that people don't see this as just, you know, in terms of social responsibility, as important as that is to all of us here. It also is about doing excellent research and doing excellent teaching and learning and making our work relevant. And I think that example Sheena gives is a really, really powerful one. So thank you, Sheena, Stephanie. We're going to just start to wrap up, and by starting to wrap up, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to share a link to the slides. We'll email you with these, but we're going to put a link into the chat now. And if you wanted to open that up in your browser and download them and keep them and reuse them and recycle them, we're all for recycling of slides here in our team. So Deanne's going to put a link to the slides in the chat. Also, we will quickly ask you two really simple closed-ended questions we ask everybody that attends these sessions. First is, did you learn something new? Secondly is, are you going to do something different as a result of today? And then thirdly, there is a bit, if you wanted to comment, don't feel free if you need to, but we do refine our sessions on the basis of that feedback. So Deanne's going to put up a link as well as to the slides there, which Catherine's put in, I see. Please, if you didn't mind, just taking literally 20 seconds just to give us a feedback on questions 1 and 2, and number 3 is optional if you wanted to feed anything else back there. So thank you while you do that. What I will say now is that there's some more information in the slides, in the link, which we didn't want to go through today. We wanted you to have airtime and hear directly from staff delivering public engagement. But there's all, if you wanted to follow up anything from today, or you're in a particular faculty, there's lots of information. So Deanne, did you want to give a flavour of what else is in those slides, and then we'll just wrap up?
Yeah, so public engagement doesn't just happen at one level of the university. Every faculty has a social responsibility team who help to lead and support on public engagement, from both a training and a grant writing and a kind of everyday experience and an enabling and a provision of opportunity. We've got our amazing cultural institutions. So if you're really not sure about what public engagement looks like and feels like, go visit Manchester Museum and see great public engagement in action, very much with a flavour of working with communities on our most local doorsteps. And of course, we've got lovely contact points both within the Central Responsibility team. Catherine Downey is our newest member of the team. She's our Public Engagement Officer, and is also looking at providing even more training. So we'd be very keen to hear what sorts of things would you like to know more about, what opportunities would help you take those first couple of steps, or indeed advance your practice as it stands now. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have our research platforms. So digital futures, healthier futures, sustainable futures. I know there's, Creative Manchester. And all of those research platforms provide really great opportunity and provision for bringing people together to really look at what public engagement is, both within the research and the teaching functions across the university. So as Julian said, bags more information available in the slides for you.
Thanks a lot, Deanne. And my aim was to give everybody 5 minutes before the next thing, if you've got something at 1 o'clock. Just to say, Stephanie, Sheena, and in her absence now, Lynn, thank you very much. Deanne and Catherine, thanks so much for organising today. I hope you got something from that. There will be lots more sessions on public engagement. Look out for those. And please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much for attending today. We really value it. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.